All right. I'm not going to give you the sales pitch this time. We did that in part 1 of this tutorial. Today's tutorial is going to be all about finishing off with programming your automatic drill rig. And as you can see in the video, it works. Okay, that's everything named. Now we do the fun part. So first things first, we'll start with our... Let's go with the new blocks. Let's go event controllers. So for our event controllers, we're going to do the function for the first one, which is cargo full, is cargo filled % equal or greater than, and we want to set that threshold to 95. By the way, if you didn't know, you can control click on the sliders so that you can enter exact amounts rather than having to slide them around. And then this is also why we have named our cargo containers, because now we can search ores and we can add all of our ore blocks or ore containers. Right, now that we've added our blocks, if we scroll down to what's been added, we've got our large cargo container ores added. What we want to make sure we tick is the AND gate. And what it does is if we hit the AND gate, it'll make sure that every one of the cargo containers, or the total sum of the storage that all 6 cargo containers have, will be at 95% before it outputs action number 1. The cool feature in event controllers is that when it's not at that, you can have it output an action. So when it's below 95%, we can have it output action slot 2. But for this one, we're only using action slot 1. Now that we've got the cargo containers added, we can select our actions. Give me 1 second. I have that spreadsheet here. And what we want it to do, we go select actions. What we want it to do is when it is at 95%, we want it to trigger timer block number 1, which is our pause. And we will go trigger now. That is all this is doing. So what it's going to do is once we hit 95%, it's going to 95% across all 6 ores containers. It's going to pause the rig so that we can process the ores and not overfill our drills. For cargo, for the next event controller, number 1, which is when the cargo is empty, we want to set it to, again, cargo filled %. And instead of being equal or greater than, we want to go to equal or less than. And for the threshold, we want that to be 50%. Now, you can set this lower if you don't want it to start and stop as often as what this one is going to. But I just found 50% was kind of an optimal position I was happy with. Same again, we're going to scroll down to where we search for our blocks, and we're just going to search ores. Going to add all 6 of our ore containers again. And we're going to hit the AND gate. Then we're going to go to select actions, and this one is going to trigger another one of our timer blocks. Timer block number 0, which is our start. And we set that to trigger now. All right, so looking at that, cargo full is going, once we get to 95% in all of our 6 ore cargo containers, we're going to pause. And then once we're at 50% in all our cargo containers, we're going to restart the rig. This just means we're not wasting any of the resources that we are drilling. It also means we're not causing any issues for the rig, because this is a rig we want to leave standalone and then come back to. The next event controller number 2, pistons at max depth. This is where we start using some of the fun options in here. So we want to go change the event from cargo filled % to piston position %. That should be down here, piston position %. And for this one, we want it to be equal or greater than, and we're going to set it to 95. The reason why I'm going 95 and not 100% is when you've got this many subgrids, so on our depth pistons, we have 7 pistons. They for alignment purposes, they sometimes don't make it to 100%. They'll make it to like 99.5. But for this reason, and because they can make it past the 95%, the timer block that we trigger, instead of going trigger now, we are starting it and we're giving it a little bit of extra time on the timer block before we trigger that action so that it can definitely get to its full depth. And then what we're adding for blocks is piston. Well, actually, we can just search for depth because this is for our depth pistons. And we're going to add all of our depth pistons. And we're going to tick the AND gate. So it's going to check that all of the pistons are at 95%. So it'll make sure that if one of the pistons falls slightly behind for whatever reason, we're still going to get the max depth out of all of the pistons. Right, next we're going to go select our actions. And for this one, when it has reached, all pistons have reached 95%, we want it to trigger timer block number 6, which is our max depth timer block. We don't want it to trigger it, we want it to start it. And that's the whole purpose of that event controller. For event controller number 3, again, we want to set this to piston position percentage. And we want this one to be equal or less than, and the threshold for this is 5%. Again, we're just going to search for depth. And we're going to add all of our depth pistons. And I'm holding shift so that I can select the list. Add blocks. And we want to make sure we hit the AND gate again. So again, this is making sure, this is for detecting when our pistons have come back to their most retracted point. We're setting it to 5% because they make it to about 1.5. Again, because of all the different grids and the weight, sometimes it doesn't make it perfectly back to 0%. And then what we want it to do is same with the pistons at max depth. We're going to start a timer block, which means we can give it some time to make sure it's fully retracted as far as it'll go before it starts the next action or outputs the next action. So for the action of this, we're again going to search for TB for our timer blocks. And we're looking for timer block number 7, which is to start extending our width. And we want to start the timer on that one. Right, that's all of our event controllers set up. Now it's time to move on to the real fun part and program up our timer blocks. So for our timer blocks, we've got TB00, our start timer. So we'll jump into that one. First thing first, I set the time for this to 5 seconds. That gives me enough time to push the button and, you know, get some stuff done or, you know, move into a good place to see that it's going to be working. So that's personal preference for this one. And then we're going to set up the actions. All right, so for this one, we're going to start on the groups. First things first, we want to turn our drills on. We want to turn our rotors, which is both our drill rotor and our counter spin rotor, on. Right. Now that we've got our rotors on, our next action is to set our pistons for depth to extend, just in case. And we then want to turn those pistons for depth, our depth pistons, on. Next, we want to make sure that our event controller number 2 for checking if we're at max depth is on. After that, we want to make sure that event controller number 3, which is checking if the pistons are all the way retracted, is definitely off. That just makes sure we're not going to instantly extend our depth the second that we start this thing. After that, we want to go back to our groups and we want to turn on our safety system, which is our welders. We want to make sure those turn on. And that's it. We have programmed our start function. So it's going to trigger these all at once, or technically it's at once, but if you end up at a slower sim speed, it's like one tick behind each other. So it goes this one, tick, that one, this one. Yeah, it's technically run in a sequence, but when your sim speed is operating at normal kind of time and it's not suffering at all, it happens all at once. Right, next up we go to TB01, our pause function. So we're going to open this one up, and for this one I set the time to 1 second. Most of the time we trigger now instead of start this action, but yeah, as short as possible. Right, for actions on this, we want to go rotors off first, because we want it to stop spinning. Then we want to go pistons for depth. We want to make sure those are off. We then want to turn off our drills. Next, we want to make sure timer block number 5, which is our uneven ground one. We want to make sure we stop this timer block, just in case we've activated it. Because this can turn the depth pistons back on after this action has happened. So we want to make sure that one's off. Next, we want to find event controller number 2, which was checking if we're at max depth. And again, we want to make sure this one's off so it doesn't accidentally trigger the reset function before it extends the width. We then want to make sure that our pistons for depth, we set those to retract. That is a safety system, just in case we mess with something. And finally, we want to turn our welders off. And that's everything we need for pause. Pause we also use as our emergency stop. But yeah, that is our pause setup. Right, now we move on to TB02, which is our reset function. For this one, I again set it at the shortest time possible, 1 second. And, oh, that's what we forgot to do. I forgot to go through and set them to silent. I just don't like hearing the, ticking. Right, TB02, reset function. So we're going to set up our actions in reset. So in reset, first thing we're going to do is we're going to trigger timer block number 1, which was our pause. We want it to pause first. So we trigger now. Next, what we want to do is we want to go to our depth pistons. And we want to reduce velocity. Now what this does is it makes it so that our pistons, or decrease velocity. It makes it so our pistons retract faster. We set it at quite a low speed to go down, so we want it to come back faster than it goes down. Next, we want to make sure that our depth pistons turn on, and we want to start timer block number 3, which is the second step. Make sure we hit start. And that is all we need to do for reset. TB03, reset second step. And this one I set at 120 seconds. Exactly 2 minutes. Again, we want to make sure we tick silent just so you don't have to hear it. And for this one, we will go and set up our actions. So after 120 seconds, we want it to turn our depth pistons off. That just locks them in place before, so that then there's no chance that they're moving around when we do our next step, or while we're doing the rest of the step. After that, we want to ensure that we increase the velocity so that it goes back to the speed that we had it set at. Then we want to do our width pistons, and we want to make sure we set those to retract. And then we want to make sure we turn the width pistons on. So if we go through this in steps, So in the reset block, we told it to trigger the next block, decrease the speed of our depth piston. So our depth pistons will retract all the way up at like 0.4 meters a second. And then we want to turn them on so they come back up really fast. That is after pausing the rig, and then it starts the next timer block. The second step, after we've reached 2 minutes, it's going to turn off the depth pistons, set the speed back to the 0.001 speed that we have for them to go down at. It's then going to set our width pistons to retract, and it's going to turn those pistons on so that they actually come back in. So, for our uneven ground first step, we set this at the shortest delay, even though we trigger now, set shortest delay. And then we want to set up the actions. And for this one, we want to go to our groups, and we want to find our depth pistons, and we want to toggle those off. Next, we want to find our timer block, number 5, which is for the second step, and we want to start the timer for that. So all this one's doing is, if it looks like the drill head's bouncing around, I'll hit this button and it'll stop it from pushing down any deeper and allow the rig to rotate a few extra times to flatten the area off before it turns them back on. So we've turned them off, and it's going to go around for however long we set before this timer on uneven ground second step takes. And for this, I set it to 240 seconds. Get rid of that. So it works out to exactly 4 minutes. Again, silent. And we'll set up the actions. At this time, we want it to just turn our depth pistons back on. I think that's all it does. That is all it does. Right, now into when we reach max depth. What do we want it to do? So when it reaches max depth, we want to set the timer for this to 20 seconds. That gives it enough time to continue doing what it's doing and get the pistons to, max extension before it does any of the actions here. Then we want to set up actions. And in this one, we want it to do essentially what pause does without doing pause, because pause causes too many issues. So for this one, we want to find our rotors group, and we're going to turn that off. Then we're going to turn our drills off. Then we're going to find our depth pistons, and we're going to reduce velocity or decrease velocity. Again, this means that we're going to retract at a much faster rate. Essentially, we're going to be copying what we did in our reset function, just we're doing a lot more of the pausing here. Now we've done reduce speed. Next up, we want to make sure that our depth pistons are on. And then we want to make sure that our event controller, number 3, which is to detect if when we're fully retracted, just because I was too lazy to time how long this takes. We want to make sure that event controller is on. And we want to make sure that event controller number 2 to detect if we're at max depth is turned off, so it doesn't try to trigger this timer block again and again and again and cause issues. That is pretty much everything needed for timer block number 6. Now her last 2 timer blocks, oh thank goodness. So for timer block number 7, we'll grab that one. I set the time on this. This is our extend width function. Yes. Timer for this I set to 90 seconds. It's 1:30. I want to make sure that before we extend width, that the pistons are retracted as much as physically possible, especially if we're on a slightly uneven ground. It means that we should have them all the way up and give us enough clearance before anything else happens. And then if we set up the actions for this, we want to go silent again. And for this one, we want to go groups. we want to find our width pistons. We want to set those to extend. And then we will turn them on after we've got them set to extend. We want to find our event controller number 3, which is to see if our pistons are retracted. We'll toggle this off so it doesn't cause some kind of repeating loop. And then we will turn event controller number 2 to check if we're at max depth back on. Next, we want to start our timer block number 8, which is the second step of this. So we want to start it, not trigger it. And then we want to make sure that we go to our depth pistons and we increase the velocity so that it goes back to the speed that it's supposed to be. Otherwise, if we hit the play function or the start function right now, it will deploy the pistons at 0.5 meters a second each. Times that by 7, that's 3.5 meters a second. It's just going to plow straight into the ground. It's going to cause issues. So we need to increase the speed so we get back to the 0.001 meters a second that I like it to go down at. Okay, what did we have next? And then we want to make sure our depth pistons are turned off, just to save us having any issues with bouncing, moving. I just found it safer this way. Cool. So we have triggered timer block number 8, and we just need to set that one up. So for timer block number 8, I set the timer for this to 7 seconds. You can probably, like, I found that you can set it for longer. 7 seconds just gave me the optimal overlap. And if we go into this one, again, we want to say silent. We want to set up actions, and we want to make sure that first things first, we are going to turn our width pistons off. We are then going to set our width pistons to retract. Again, this is just the safety. I'm just double checking that if I do accidentally turn them on, they're not going to continue pushing out and cause some major damage to it. Then we want to double check that our event controller number 2, for checking that we're at max depth, is definitely on. And we want to go and trigger our timer block number 000, which is start. And that, no, we want to trigger it. Change that to trigger now. All right, so now if we work through this in series, our start just turns everything on that needs to be on and allows us to start digging down. Pause, does exactly what it says. Yeah, no, I think we set this extend width second step. But the part where it starts getting complicated is our max depth and extend width. So what we're doing is, after we've started, our rig automatically drills down. We have our event controller number 2 detecting for when our depth pistons reach 95%. Once we've reached that 95%, it's going to start this timer, where it's going to allow another 20 seconds before it essentially pauses the rig and then retracts the depth pistons. Next, instead of timing the retraction, we're using event controller number 3. So in the max depth timer block, that's why we've turned on the retracted pistons event controller. And we're using this to detect when our pistons make it back to 5%. Once they are at that 5% threshold, it's then triggering or starting, the timer block number 7, which is the timer that's going to extend our width pistons. This is set to 1:30, so after the timer has finished, it's going to set our width pistons to extend. It's going to turn them on, and it's then going to make sure that the event controller for detecting that we're retracted is turned off. Make sure that our pistons max depth is turned on, and it's going to reset the speed for our depth pistons before starting the timer for the second step, which is 7 seconds, where it stops the extension of our width pistons by turning those pistons off, and make sure again that our depth pistons, that our event controller number 2 for detecting we're at max depth is turned back on, and essentially triggering timer block number 0, which starts the rig back up. It is like it's a whole mental kind of muck around, but you know, it works. And that is pretty much us ready to go. Other than we do need to go through and do all of our settings. So first things first, let's grab our pistons. So depth pistons, we're going to turn these off. Now I've found a speed, like when I'm at 6 pistons, 0.001 was perfect. Well, no, 0.01 was perfect. I think at 0.05 is the optimal speed that I use for my depth pistons. Next, we don't change anything with width pistons. Next, we need to do our rotors. So a drill rotor, no, we'll turn all of our rotors off, except for our solar. That's a separate rotor. So we'll set our drill rotor at the velocity at 3 rotations per minute. We'll give it some braking torque, so when it turns off, it can stop itself and it doesn't just keep spinning perpetually, because that could cause issues. Then we'll jump into, I also give this one more torque, because it has a tendency to have a lot of force on the end of it. So I try to get it about 90. I can't remember what that measure is, but about 92. And then I kind of keep it about 30 something for braking torque. For counter spin rotor, we just want to reverse what we've set for velocity. So we said 3 rotations per minute on our drill head. So we want this one to be -3 rotations per minute. We'll give it some braking torque, but it doesn't need the boosted torque because it doesn't have as much happening on the end of it. This is literally just to make sure that our solar tower stays, anything above this rotor is perfectly still. It doesn't move when the drill rig moves, so that our solar aligner isn't fighting the movement of the drill all the time. Right, so that is our depth piston speed set. That is our 2 rotors speed set. What are we missing? We haven't set up our programmable block. So if we go PB, we are going to browse scripts. And we make some tweaks to Izzy's inventory manager as well. So, main thing being, after we've imported it in, we want it to, want to change some settings. We don't want it to auto assign containers. So master switch, we want to make sure it doesn't assign or unassign containers. To make sure we put this in correctly, false. And just in case, we'll set the assign new containers if a type is full or not present. We want to set this to false as well. So by turning the master switch to false, it should stop anything else in here from triggering. We don't need to assign any of that. I don't like assigning ores and ingots to one container, especially not in this setting. We'll set that to false. Autocrafting. This is one that we want to do. So we want to make sure it's enabled, which it looks like it is. If because I end up using multiple screens on this, I like to set this to true. Let's add the header to every screen so it tells you what screen number you're on. I think that's us pretty much done. Like, you can go through and set some changes to your refinery handling. I just leave it so that it processes stone first and then everything else secondary, because we end up with a lot more stone than anything else. And the other resources take so long to process. Cool, we'll go ahead and check that code. Compilation successful. Okay. Now we can check LCC. Now it's just gone and corrected all the names with the percentage that they're full. And if we go SCC, it's done the same for our components. We're just double checking that I've spelt them correctly, because you know, it wouldn't be the first time that I've mucked that up. Next we still have our solar aligner to set up, so we'll go to the solar align, which is our custom turret controller. So azimuth rotor is the solar rotor. Elevation rotor is actually our solar hinge. Sign camera, solar camera. After having assigned that, we can tell it to always aim at sun. That should be it moving into place quite quickly. I haven't set any. All the rotors are off, so it's probably moving a bit. Yeah, it's a bit bouncy at first, just for the initial movement where it moves so quickly. That should start charging up our batteries. They'll be fully recharged in 5 hours. Let's check our solar panels and see if doubling them up actually works. So it should be the higher number solar panels. Okay, so we are producing a lot more power than what our batteries can handle. Right, so now that we've got that done, we haven't done our inertia tensor. Oh, that could have been a problem. So we want to find our pistons. And for all of our pistons, we need shear inertia tensor on. This is going to cause it to bounce a bit.
Fuel critical.
But we need that on. And then the next thing you're going to need to do is to give this thing some resources by hand, which we'll use the admin command to give it some stone just to kick it off and make sure it's got enough to start crafting. Stone. We'll give it 8,000. Should hear our refineries kick in. And this is just so that we can craft the starting resources that it needs. Like, it probably only needs like 2,000, but we need to craft at least enough of the steel plate and large steel tubes to be able to ensure that we've got the resources on hand to repair the piston head and the rotor head for our drill rotor. And now I'm gonna just chuck in some extras that I'm gonna do to make sure that this thing operates. So one of the first things I want is some speed modules. I probably don't want that version of the speed module. So I'm not, like, because this is going to generate millions and millions of resources, especially like iron, nickel, silicon. I'm not worried about What are we not worried about? We're not worried about the kind of the yield. We're going to get plenty out of this as it is. I am worried about it getting backed up if I hit too much kind of iron ore. So that's why I'm going to be using speed modules. I'm not sure if I accounted for this in my power of this thing, so this could break the time lapse. And then after we've got those in, I'm going to go ahead and make some changes to just make it look a little bit nicer. So I'm just going to fill in some of this empty space. That'll give me a nice place to put our observation kind of startup platform. Oh, yeah, we'll take another blueprint of it with the upgrade modules. That just gives us some nice platforms that we can work from. In theory, at this height, you could also start building out wider here, because the drill head can never come higher than this. So, like, I tend to end up, especially when I'm trying to make the time-lapse videos of this thing, I end up adding extra refineries at this height, extra cargo containers for ingots, because I tend to run out of that space so quickly. And then if I need to for the time lapses, because they literally take for this thing 18 hours for it to completely finish a full hole. Yeah, I tend to also set it up so that I chuck a reactor on here and I go to bed for the time lapse. Right. So now we got a nice little kind of platform for us to stand on. We're going to set ourselves up with a button panel. I'm not sure which way it's going to rotate, but and again, so far we haven't used any modded blocks or DLC blocks. Actually, I want it there, not there. So our first button, I want it to be for a timer block 00, and I want it to start that timer. Second button, I want it to be for timer block 01, which is our pause button, and I want it to trigger now. Third button, I want that to be for our timer block uneven ground, so timer block number 4, and I want that to trigger now. And then our fourth and final button for this build, we'll set the timer block number 2, which is our reset should we ever need to use it, and we'll set that to start. That is us pretty much set to go. No, we're not. We need an LCD. And we will stick it in here. On this LCD, we just want to say autocrafting. I probably didn't reference that right. EB. Edit, find out auto crafting, and it tells us here. Yeah, I missed the capital letter. You want to come here. That should update, hopefully. There we go. We also forgot to add in the components that it needs. So we'll come here. We'll go production. We want 40 of the steel plate and 20 of the steel tube. The reason I do this is, something else we forgot. In our Izzy's inventory manager, we can set it up so that it automatically balances the amount of cargo, the amount of, say, of a category between all labeled containers. So for like all our ores containers, we can make sure it's got a perfect, if we've got, it's all perfectly even. There's no one cargo container that's 100% and another one that's like 5%. Now I just got to remember where it is. Balance items between containers of the same type. We want to set that to true. We'll check code because that'll save it. Now, if we have a look at our screen, we may be a little short on stone, on iron. Have a look at our production. Reckons it's finished. We want to always keep 40 steel plate available. That's what I love about the these inventory management is you push F on the screen, you tell it to how much you want after you've already made some, and it will produce it for you. All right, we might be short on some iron ingots, so we're going to give it some more stone. Yeah, it is a bit of, you do have to give it some stuff to get it started. You could wait and set this up after you've started the rig. But, I kind of really want to go to bed and not have to worry about this again. So, start the time lapse and leave this thing going. Production, we need to get some large steel tube produced. So hopefully that'll appear here. Eventually. There it is. And we want it to keep, we'll keep 20. It's not going to cost us that much. Like, this is the main reason why I went to the inventory management script as well. You can set assemblers to kind of repeat queues. You can't get them to stop at specific numbers. And yeah, so that's why I gave in and finally used the script on this thing. But on that note, that is this rig built. We're going to go ahead and slap down a passenger seat. Is that vanilla? Yes, looks like it. Where do we want to sit to watch this thing? We'll slap it right there where we can sit and watch. We'll take a blueprint because by time this thing's finished, I will be in bed. And we will rename it SGC Automatic Drill Rig Mark II. We'll hit our start button. I'll jump in my passenger seat, hit my view button so I can get out to a good point. Turn off my my HUD. One thing I am noticing is I might just turn on share inertia tensor on the solar rotor. Solar hinge, I can turn it on. And solar rotor, we can turn it on. And that should just help with some of the bumpiness up the top. And because we have built this thing, I built it a little higher. It's going to take a little while before it actually starts touching the ground. In hindsight, I should have set up some way to get it down to the ground faster. But looking from Germbot's perspective, I can see that it is slowly extending. It's probably moved about half a block. Actually, might leave you with Germbot's view. I think that meteor impact site is an issue. I don't think the drill on our base can actually make it through the meteor. I can't remember, and I'm not going to be here to see it when it finally gets here. So I'll take it out completely. That's one less thing for me to have to stress about. Pretty sure the rest of that's just stone, but yeah, better to be safe than sorry. Yeah, actually, from this angle, you can see just how far off the ground I built this thing. It's probably a lot higher off the ground than it needs to be. I just didn't want to have to build on my version that I have in my survival world. I built out something to that I use as a projection to tell me whether or not I have enough clearance for the drills to dig in. And if I take you over to the last attempt at building this tutorial, I tried to level this ground and it didn't work properly. Looks like this one's finished, but it attempted to... Yeah, that's something I need to figure out how I'm going to check. Is it'll continue drilling while resetting and just doing the outside section over and over and over again. In theory, you know, you should... Unless you're leaving your game world open or you're playing on a server, this thing should never get to its max depth. And in full hole, and you know, without you having come back to check on it. But yeah, that's the test one that I used. I'm actually using the tutorial one to fix the one we're using in our survival series. And is there anything else I can kind of tease you with? Oh, we've got a couple of the builds that we may be using in the survival series laying around here. Some tests for a base idea. Yeah, I've been working on a little bit. But, you know, life's very busy at the moment. We're having to move house very soon. Okay, so our speed that we've set isn't quite right. We're having to, yeah, so let's just fix this before I get into what I was thinking of doing. All right, we've paused it. We want to go to our Pistons depth and change our speed. We had another 0 there. 0.005. What does that end up as? And we will hit start. but we will also hit uneven ground. So I can fix things up. I think I've broken the cargo container. That's what happens when you expect that I've set something up right the first time. Alright, this is going to piss me off, so we'll fix that up. Make sure that's going, that's fine. At least we get to check whether or not the uneven ground system's working. And that is why we have the welders, because as you can see, it was welding up the piston head at the bottom already. I can guarantee it had to weld up the rotor head already as well. But the uneven ground timer block is doing as it should. It has leveled out. Well, it's helping us level out the ground. It's paused the depth piston so that we can take out all the ridges before we start going down again. And I will make sure I re-blueprint this thing. I will have to reset it, so it'll be at the end of the time lapse. Hopefully my PC doesn't crash on me tonight. But yes, like while we're back at this point, it's been a very busy time period. It's why I haven't had a chance to get episode 2 of our series out yet. Is the house that we're renting at the moment is going up for sale soon. So we're having to find and get ready to move into a new house fairly soon. My partner and I have just spent the last week off sick with COVID. And, you know, lots of stress at the moment. So I figured I'd get the tutorial done and get this up because it's something that I've already tested over and over and over again. Whereas for the episode, I haven't had a chance to kind of figure out where we're going next with that. Like I've got a fair idea that we're going to go to a base and we'll probably build an inchworm kind of rig, but that's about as far as I've got into. I haven't had a chance to actually test an inchworm rig. I haven't had a chance to figure out exactly what I want the floor to look like, because I want it to weld up the floor for us as it goes. It's going to take us a lot longer to build that rig than it is going to be used for probably, but it will, you know, as promised, it will be automated. But yeah, that is going to be kind of all from me from this episode. Actually, before I go, if you are wanting to build a rig like this, I actually used the settings from this tutorial to fix the rig in our survival series. Because I was having issues with that one. So by redoing it for this tutorial, I copied these exact settings to get the survival one working properly and to stop it from snapping its snapping the drills off at the piston head that we have the welder on at the bottom, because it was continually snapping off my drills because I had the speed set wrong. I just had some of the settings on the timer block set wrong. So this is the be all and end all. I will go back and edit the video so that I can update the speed. I'll put it on screen. And if you're at this point, you've already seen it, but I'll go back and put it in there and let you know what the setting is supposed to be instead of what I'm saying. But yeah, that's going to be all from me. I'm going to leave you with a nice kind of time lapse of this rig doing its thing, and I trust it. I trust in my setup so much. I'm not even going to be here to watch it. I'm going to go and do other things while this time lapse just records itself. But until next time, stay safe, look after yourself, and peace.